I'm Jodie Tedder. I went through incest. I watched my father rape and murder a woman, and then I turned 4. My father was born in the territory of Tennessee, and he migrated to the Northwest where he met my mother. By the time they were 24, they had 4 children, and I was the youngest of those 4 children. So everything that I am going to share and have shared in my life actually are from my own memory. And it's interesting how memory works. We moved into our big house after I turned 4. And so before that time, I actually have a lot of memory. The first memory that I have in that house, we lived on Delaware Lane. The way that memory comes back, I think, is also fascinating and important in these stories. I was actually an adult. I'd had 2 children by this time, and it was October, and I wanted to have pumpkin ice cream. So I was with my mother-in-law and her daughter, and we were looking for a Dairy Queen, and it happened to be that I remembered this Dairy Queen that was in the neighborhood of my childhood home. And as it turns out, I had never been by that childhood home because we moved out of that home when I was 4. And when we went by that house and I pointed it out, immediately my body, my groin area just burst into flaming pain. It was wild. And while I looked at that house, the memory immediately came back, and I remember being on a couch. I had this weird kind of pie-shaped couch. It was kind of one of those 60s, and it was like this pink gray color, and I had a dress on, and my father was on his knees in front of me. And that was my first recollection of that house. And unfortunately or fortunately, that opened my memory back to that time. And so from about 24 on, my mind just began to recall. I had small children, and the first joy in my life was having my kids. And so they were really unwelcome memories that then just intrusively continued to come back into my life. Importantly, I think in my story, we moved into the big house, and I remember in the big house, I always had this reoccurring dream that came to me. It was never not with me. And it was a dream of my father, and he would be in my bedroom, but I would be downstairs watching him in my room. And the dream never changed. It was this old big wooden desk, and he was standing with a woman, and she had a dress on. It was black and white, and he would take his hand and force her down on the table and then use his left hand to pick up her skirt and begin to rape her, and my dream would end. And I never understood the dream really, but I had that dream all the time, and it never changed. It was always like that. And then later in my life, obviously it's almost like your mind wants to put back together the story, because that's how kind of trauma works. And so it was years and years and years later of recall that when my mind continued to open. What got me into counseling was actually that dream. And then I also always remembered, bizarrely, I didn't remember the sexual abuse in my life as much as I remembered this room that I always had. It wasn't a dream, but I just remembered Dad and one of the people that he knew in his life. We had gone to this motel room. I assumed in my life that I had just been sexually abused there. When my father died, we talked for 6 hours, and he apologized for the child molestation that he allowed and that he allowed people in his life to do to us. So I assumed that that's what it was until I got into counseling and said, I want to remember this room. It took years of therapy to kind of get there, and eventually we did get to that room. But it was a long, arduous journey of recovering memories and healing those memories. There's always weird pieces that stay with you, like that reoccurring dream I had. I never talked to anybody about it, but when I was about 11 or 12, I wrote death on the wall. I pick up a pencil and I drew a D, and the D must have been at least 1.5 feet tall. And then I wrote out death, and I went in the kitchen and got a knife. I hammered that knife, and I put the knife in as an exclamation point and waited for everybody to get home. But always my body was working out this death experience that I had witnessed when I was a little girl. So after years and years of intensive therapy, it was a Saturday, and all of a sudden my mind, I just felt like I was losing my mind, kind of. I can't explain it any other way. So I called my counselor and I said, I don't know, I'm struggling today. You need to send men in white jackets because I feel like I'm going to lose my mind. And she said, Jodie, I want you to go to a quiet location. So I went down the hall and I went to my bedroom and I shut the door, and she reminded me that I make it worse because I block. And if I was ready to unblock that, she's there with me. So she told me to get on my bed and just get in a comfortable position and to focus on something in the room, but make no judgments about it. So I lay down, and right above me is a ceiling fan. And so I do exactly what she says. I start doing the ritual of there's fan blades, there's a screw, and all of a sudden it was so bizarre. Right to the left of the fan, I saw the room and I saw the murder happen. In that moment, I had remembered what occurred that day back in 1968, and I knew that there was a murder and that they killed this woman after my father raped her. And at that moment in life, you don't go any deeper in memory because that is such a horrific thing to remember. Like, I didn't want any other details. It took me about I bet 5 to 10 years to get all of the memory back. And it made so much sense to me that I went in the other room and I told her I have to call the police because I know that they killed her. And I did. Believe it or not, they didn't think I was nuts. They listened to me. I hired my own PI. I spent my own money, and he worked with me. And we probably found the victim, but that's a whole nother thing. Until we have DNA, we can never prove who that victim is. And we need to get the body up out of the ground where she still lays. So that memory comes out. The first thing I want to do is get back into life. I'd left a bad marriage. I was having a lot of fun in life. The last thing I wanted to do was make up. And that's what people don't understand, is my life was good. I was out of a bad marriage. I didn't want to go back and remember any of this stuff. But to get to the better life, I had to go back and explore my trauma. So I was dating this guy, having a lot of fun, and he stayed the night with me one night. And this night, he got up and went to the bathroom, and he walked back in my room. And when the door opened, I flew up on my bed because I was in a severe flashback, and all I saw was my father getting into the car that night. The car doors open, and the man who was with us was behind Dad, and the headlights were on, and I was in that moment, and I was freaking out. I was saying, "Are you Dad or this other man? Are you Dad or this other man?" And it freaked my boyfriend out so bad that he literally got dressed at 3 o'clock in the morning and left my house. So going back into the day of the murder, it took me years and years and years to get there. I'm sure the murder memory would have come back faster to me. But again, I think it's important to remember that we get to have the timeline around healing. So that morning, it was June 1968, because I did get the hospital records, which confirmed that date. My father was gone that night and came home in the morning, and all I know is that he collected me from the house. I don't know anything else, but I do learn a little bit more later from my uncle that my parents had been in a fight, probably because my dad had been out all night. So he comes and gets me. He's got my grandma's car. We're in this big blue car, 4 doors, black seats. And I can see that my dad's face is pensive. And I remember as a little girl being scared of that pensive look on him because someone was going to get hurt, because I just knew my dad. And we weren't on the freeway very long. It was a 2-lane freeway back in those days. And we turned into this motel. I'd never been there. I didn't know what a motel was. But we pulled in, and there's these 2 buildings and a building in the middle. And Dad got out of the car and put me in this white plastic chair that was sitting there and just left. And he kind of walked to the right of me. And across the street was a railroad track. And I knew railroads because my brother had gotten, that Christmas, he had gotten this railroad. And we were fascinated by that railroad. Me and my brother, like, that was a happy time in our childhood. I remember my father calling me away from that to rape me, but I also remember that railroad, and it was very cool. And so I was kind of lost in thought about, I'd like a train to go by to see what it was. And at that time, this lady came walking up from the left, which was where the room was. I learned later that they have a room down there. And this very petite, small blonde lady walked up to me and took my hand, which became a really bad flashback for me later in my life. Scared the shit out of me. I kind of thought it was a demon coming at me till I learned what flashbacks were. Anyway, so this lady comes up and she's kind of asking me if I'm Stan's daughter. And at that time, my father sees, obviously, that she's there, and he's angry, and he comes out of this kind of office area from this side of us. And he takes me by the hand and he walks me so fast. I remember that I'm walking on my tiptoes because he's pissed. And when Dad was mad, you just did whatever you could to keep up. And he opened this room where this lady had come from down that kind of walkway, and he threw me in there. Well, he swatted me pretty hard on my butt, and he put me in that room and shut the door. So now I'm just in this room, and the three of them come walking in the room, and there is a man that's carrying her through the door, and my father's walking behind them. So now there's three of them. I didn't know there was this third person until that moment. So they come in and they go over to the table, they make drinks, they start partying, and I just think that we're gonna be okay because everybody's just partying. And then at some point it just kind of changes. I can see my dad kind of pace, and my dad was kind of like a crazed rat. He always was. And I remember thinking something's gonna go wrong here. I felt it way before anything happened. And then my memory's kind of fragmented. It doesn't come back like a player or anything like that. But the next memory that I have is my father putting her down on the bed. It's exactly what my reoccurring dream was. He takes his right hand and he forces her down on the bed, and with his left hand he picks up her skirt and he prepares to rape her. And he does rape her, and after he rapes her, the next thing I remember is her turned around. She had a skirt on and she's scooting up the bed screaming at him. I can't tell you the words, but I know that she's telling him he's going to be in trouble. And I remember thinking that she was going to be in trouble because you didn't talk to my dad like that. And then the next thing I remember is that they're on the right side of the bed, and this one man that was with us was in front of the lamp, and she's in front of him, and he's holding her arms down hard. He was a really big man, and she was a little lady. And I remember that scene, and my dad just walks up to him, and in those days he always wore a knife on his belt. And he took that knife out and slit her throat. And after that, her head kind of went forward, and then they laid her down. And I never got to see her again. They put her up on the bed and wrap her up in that bedspread and put her in the bathroom, in the tub. And they're in there for quite a long time, but I don't remember anything else. Dad does go before they bring her into the bathroom, Dad does go in and scrub the knife off, but I can't remember exactly. That could have been after, it could have been before. I just remember him going in the bathroom. That's actually when I learned it's a bathroom, because he goes in and washes his hands and probably that knife, because later Dad comes to me. Now the lady's in the bathroom, in the bathtub, and Dad walks out to me, and I'm still pegged against this wall, and he makes me stand up, and he puts that knife in my hand, in my right hand, and he makes me walk to the bathroom door. He doesn't make me go in the bathroom, which I'm really thankful for, but he does make me walk to the door with that knife in my hand. And that lady was in there, and the spout was on the left-hand side, and her head was back in this awkward way, and they're blowing water over her cut area on her throat, and I think they're just cleaning her up. And then I just don't have to watch anymore. I don't remember anything else after that. And then after that, the door opens, and I remember seeing the sun, but somehow I don't remember, but Dad had obviously gone out and turned the car around, because when the door is open to that room, his car is now backed up, which I actually had to go back and make sure that, because the weird thing is, in that hotel, the car is like this, but it seems like it should be like this. But anyway, I drove down there after that memory, and it's still that way. It's kind of backwards how you pull in, and that's exactly how the car was backed in. And then they carried past me this body that had been rolled in this bedspread, and the trunk was open, and they put her in there, and Dad opened the back of that car and told me to get in. And I remember thinking, I was so little, it was hard for me to get in the car. It was back in those times, those cars were huge, and it was really hard for me to get in the back seat. And I did get in the back seat, and the other guy who was with us was on the right-hand side, and Dad was driving, and I was in the back, and I was terrified that lady was going to reach through, because I knew they'd put her in the trunk. And I just remember thinking, we got on the freeway then, the other man starts crying, and he's talking to Dad, and I remember him saying to him, "Why did you do it, Stan?" And we're driving down the freeway, and I don't remember anymore at all, except the fear and terror that she was going to reach through. The next memory I have of that day is we're now up at my parents' property. They had just purchased 40 acres, and we'd been there, and so I knew it was our property, because we built a house that we actually move into that house in November. So soon after that, we move into that house. So we're up where the house is, and then there's this great big hill that goes down into we always called it the field, and there was a tree that me and my brother always played in. And when I woke up that night with that boyfriend memory, that tree was where me and my brother used to play, and we'd sit on that. Well, the car was sitting right underneath that tree. And so the first memory I have is them taking her out of the trunk, and they walk past the car and they go down into the field. It's during the day, but I don't have to go, and I'm so thankful that I don't have to go. And that's all I know. And then the next memory is we're in town, and it's just me and my father. We're in the blue car. We're in front of my grandmother's house, and the trunk's open, and he has the hose and he's spraying out the trunk. The next memory, we're now back at our house, and in the very front bedroom, there was this weird closet area in the front bedroom, and my father lifted up this kind of in the ceiling, there was this tile, and he moved it over, and I remember him having, it had to be the wrap knife, but it was a white, kind of a white cloth package, and he put it up there. Years later, when I was in my 30s and told my mother this memory, she's like, "That your dad put everything up there, important records, like everything. I can't believe you knew that." I don't have any other memory at all of the day until waking up at night, and we're down in the field, we're in that gold car, and Dad and this other man are out there, they've got like shovels and stuff, I don't know. But it's super late, and I was sleeping by the time my father came in. My dad was a diabetic, and so when he came in, I'd seen him in a diabetic reaction before, and he was acting kind of all goofy, and he'd also been drinking all day. I remember them drinking all day, and we hadn't eaten at all. I hadn't eaten anything, and so I know they hadn't eaten anything. So when he got in the car, he was acting goofy and silly, and he had this necklace, and he put it in my face, but he crawled in and he laid down on his tummy with his head in my lap, and his feet were kind of up on the other side, and he just passed out. The other man that was with us then got in the front seat and drove us home, and it was very dark, because I can remember as a child just seeing the silhouette of him, and I knew we were going home. So as I continued on in therapy, we talked about finding out more around, when the murder possibly happened. So I went to my parents, and my mom said to me, "Your father ended up in the hospital. That night we had to take him to the hospital, and if you get those hospital records," which I think she thought I'd never get, because the year is now 2007. This murder happened in 1968. She said, "You'd have the date of your murder." Well, I went to the medical center and I got this release. My father was alive at the time, and so he had to sign it. In retrospect, I should have lied and just signed it and turned it in. Nobody would have ever known, but I wasn't that person, and so I did. It took me 1 year for my father to sign that medical release. My father signed the medical release, and I took it to the hospital. And this is wild how these stories happen. I faxed it in, and then they called me and said, "It's ready, come to this location." So I walked in, and the lady disappears and comes back, and she has the microfiche in this white envelope. And she hands it to me, but she doesn't let go. And I was kind of like, what? And she says, "I don't know what you're looking for, but these were in a box to be destroyed next week. I hope you find what you're looking for." It was just so like a kind of a God wink moment, like, wow. So I go down to the library, I put this microfiche in the library, and there it is. My father goes in a reaction. The hospital records that I still have say that he is in he almost killed himself. This murder almost killed him. He was a diabetic, and he was in such a severe reaction that he was frothing at the mouth when they brought him in. So now I have my date. It's June 8th, 1968. And it was late at night. Everybody told me that it wasn't late at night. It was. He got brought into the hospital at 11:59 a.m. and so p.m. So it was right before the 9th. Actually, when they start working on him, it's 1 o'clock on June 9th. So that's why we know the murder was June 8th. So I hired this detective to help me. And so I write to the Cold Case Cowboys. And the Cold Case Cowboys say, most people don't find people because you have to cast your net broader. And I was just looking in Oregon and Washington for a victim. But I have the date now. So I find a national database and I put in June 8th, 1968. There's only one hit. And here's the important thing. The lady that goes missing on a Saturday, and actually her sister says June 8th, 1968, she's a tiny blonde lady. And so, right, she has to kind of match the description that I have, or we're not going to have a match. My dad died, I think in 2008 or 2010, I think. And when he died, right before he died, the day before he died, my mom called me and said, your father's going on hospice, Jodie. You have one last chance to talk to him. So it was hard for me. I had to stop and actually have a few drinks because I was terrified of my father. I didn't see my father very much. And in my adult years, literally my body would just, have horrible reactions to go to see him. I'd be terrified. So I stopped and had a few drinks and then went up to see him and sat down because I had some real discussing to do with him. And I write all about that actually. And I went home that night and wrote it up and gave it to the police because my father apologized for the murder in that discussion. We sat and we talked about a lot of things. But one of the things I told him was that I was going to bring this body up. And he said, I know you will. Now, I haven't been able to keep that promise because when he died, the police closed the case and they told me they needed a confession or a body. But when me and my dad went and sat back down on the couch, I told him that I'd had guilt all of my life for leaving that room alive when she didn't. And at that time, my father looked at me and said, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. And it was a tremendous gift that he gave me because when he sat back on the couch, he said it again. He said, I'm sorry. And so I did try to dig. One time I went up, I hired an excavator. The police were still with me at that time. And they told me if I got to the bones that they would be there. We actually were going to, one of the detectives at the time said that he had this class that were architects at the local college and they were going to bring him in. So what happened was though, I hired an excavator. He came up to the site. We were standing at the site. I didn't want to tell him that we were digging for a body because it's awkward and it's hard for human beings to even hear this story, let alone help somebody dig for it. So he looks down and he says, are we digging for a body? And I just said the truth because it's just how I've lived my life. I hate lies. And so at the cost of all things, most people say I'm honest to a fault. That's okay because I came from a bunch of liars and heathenistic, horrible. So anyway, I tell him we are. And you know what he says? I'm going to help you. It's been really cool how human beings step up and help, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to share this story is that somebody might have something that could help us. But anyway, so here we go. We start with the backhoe. And all of a sudden, well, it was kind of it was hard. It was a terribly hard day, but we had netting and stuff that you could, every bucket that came out, we went through. But we knew that she was in the deepest part of the dump. And so as we go and we start going through this rubbish, you can see cans that are like 1970s. And by the time we started to get, because my dad drank beer and Pepsi, that's all he drank, and it was filled with beer and Pepsi cans. So we start getting to the oldest cans and we came up against my sister's road. And I had to stop the dig because my father and my sister built a road to her house on the deepest part of the dump. Since that time, that road has been moved now. It's been several years and I've heard that road is gone. But unfortunately now the police, I don't know if they just don't have resources. They always say, we find you credible, but they can't help. So anyway, we had to stop that dig. So I cannot now get on the property because my sister prohibits me to come onto her land. Unfortunately, in families like this, when my memories first came out about the incest, all of the siblings talked about the incest. I have a sister that wrote a book about the experience and she does talk about the incest. The other two of my siblings went back into denial because they just didn't have the strength to stay with the story, unfortunately. And so today, my sister stands to inherit that property. She wants that property and she wants that body not to be found. And so interestingly though, here's another very interesting fact. My mother sold her property. She wanted the money and she wanted off that property. I would love to complete this one day. It would be right for her. And it is why I wrote my book. It's called A Prisoner by No Crime of My Own. And in that I tell her story and with my voice, she has a voice because her voice ended in 1968. And that's hugely important for me because while women's advocacy has come a long way in this world, there are tons of silent victims and she's one. And while I know I didn't do it, one of the things that my counselor spent a lot of time telling me was, he said, Jodie, you have to quit saying we, because I'd always say we buried the body, we went here, and my counselor would always stop me and say, Jodie, quit saying we. It's not you, they did it, you didn't do it. And so I've tried to separate that, but it is a heavy burden in my life to make it right for her. I have a full life. I have 5 grandkids. live in a beautiful area. I relocated to Montana, which was very healthy for my being, to get away from where all that. I used to have to drive by that motel where she was murdered constantly. And so it's really been beautiful to relocate. So I would love to share with anybody who's going through trauma or the healing work of recovering memories. All of those things are kind of catchphrases today. And I guess I'd like to normalize it for you. Just as the guy next to you remembers something, remember that it's a natural process. This isn't something that's contrived. Allow it to be, and remember that you have full control over when you heal and when you don't want to heal. Trauma is exactly the same way. It's just memories that we don't want to remember, and so we block them. And I'll tell you one thing, my life has been difficult, but you know what it made it harder? Was to never go back to the memories that I had. It would have destroyed me. I know I would have been a full-blown alcoholic. I would have stayed with men that abused me. I have scars on my face from being with people who mistreated me terribly. And by going back, all of a sudden, I learned I was a victim and I wasn't complicit in the crime. The best self-care that you can ever give yourself is to believe yourself and believe your story. That's the best self-care you can ever do.